The day my husband died was the darkest day of my life. The sky was a dull gray, as if the world itself was mourning with me. I stood there in the cold, clutching the edges of my black dress, my hands trembling, not from the chill, but from the weight of a grief so heavy it felt like it might crush me. Around me, people whispered condolences, their faces blurred by tears and sorrow, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, broken and raw. I kept thinking about the last time I saw him, how he smiled at me, that gentle, tired smile that hid so much pain. He had been sick for months, but I never imagined this day would come so soon, so suddenly. The funeral felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. I was numb, yet every nerve screamed with loss. Just as the priest's words faded into silence and the crowd began to disperse, my phone buzzed in my purse. I hesitated, afraid to break the fragile bubble of grief I was trapped in. When I finally looked, the screen showed a name I hadn't expected to see. My husband's boss. My heart skipped a beat. Why would he be calling now? I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a voice I recognized immediately. Stern, urgent. You need to see this, he said, his tone heavy with something I couldn't quite place. It's important. It's about your son. My breath caught. My son? What could possibly be so urgent that it couldn't wait until after the funeral? I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, mixing with the grief that already consumed me. The world I thought I knew was suddenly shifting beneath my feet. I tried to steady myself, but the flood of emotions was overwhelming. Confusion, fear, and a strange flicker of hope all tangled inside me. Maybe this call was a lifeline, a way to understand what was really happening behind the scenes. Or maybe it was the start of something even more painful. As I stood there, surrounded by the quiet murmurs of the mourners leaving, I realized that this day, meant to be about saying goodbye, was about to become the beginning of a new, unexpected battle. And I wasn't sure I was ready. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't ignore that call. Not now, not ever. The funeral had been a blur of faces and tears, but my mind kept drifting back to the man I had loved for so many years. He was more than just my husband. He was my partner, my confidant, my anchor. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself. And yet, in the midst of that loss, a strange sense of unease began to creep in. I remembered the last conversation I had with him just days before he passed. He had been worried about our son, about money, about things I didn't fully understand at the time. He had looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Promise me you'll be careful. Don't let anyone take advantage of you." At the time, I thought he was just scared, overwhelmed by his illness. But now, standing alone in the cold, I wondered if there was more to it. Was there something he knew that I didn't? Something he was trying to protect me from? The call from his boss felt like a key to a locked door I hadn't even realized was there. I felt a mix of dread and determination. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I walked away from the cemetery, the weight of the day pressing down on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change forever. The man I had trusted, the son I had raised, the family I thought I knew, all of it was suddenly shrouded in shadows. I found a quiet corner and called the boss back. His voice was low, urgent. "There's something you need to see, something about your son's behavior, things that could hurt you if you don't act." My heart pounded. Hurt? Betrayal? I wanted to scream, to run, to hide. But I also knew I had to face it, for my husband, for myself. That moment, standing alone with a phone pressed to my ear, was the moment everything changed. The moment I realized that grief was only the beginning of my story. I remember sitting down that later evening, the house eerily silent without my husband's presence. The walls seemed to close in, memories flooding every corner. I thought about the life we had built together, the dreams, the struggles, the love. And I thought about the son we had raised, the man he had become. Was he the son I thought I knew? Or was there a darker truth hidden beneath the surface? The call from the boss echoed in my mind. "You need to see this." What was it? What had I been blind to all these years? Tears streamed down my face as I realized that the journey ahead would be painful but necessary. I had to uncover the truth no matter how much it hurt. Because sometimes the hardest battles come after the tears have dried. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the silence and the unanswered questions. The grief was still there, raw and aching, but beneath it was a growing fire, a fierce determination to protect myself, to honor my husband's last wishes, and to reclaim my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a woman ready to fight for her truth. And it all started with that phone call. The day of my husband's funeral was supposed to be the end of a chapter. Instead, it was the beginning of a story I never expected to live. A story of betrayal, courage, and ultimately, hope. And I was ready to tell it.
Before that devastating day, my life had been a delicate balance of love, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. My husband, David, and I had built a life together from the ground up. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had something far more precious: a family, a home filled with memories, and a bond forged through years of shared struggles and triumphs. David was a man of integrity, the kind of person who worked tirelessly to provide for us. He wasn't flashy or boastful. He was steady, dependable, and kind. I admired him deeply, not just for his strength, but for the gentle way he treated everyone around him. He believed in hard work and honesty, values he passed on to our son, Elijah. I, too, had always been a hard worker. I spent years juggling jobs, managing the household, and making sure our family never went without. I took pride in my resilience, even when the days felt long and the nights even longer. I was the glue that held us together, the quiet force behind our family's stability. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family life, there were cracks. Small, almost invisible at first, but growing wider with each passing year. Those cracks centered around Elijah. From a young age, Elijah was different. He was bright, ambitious, and charming, but there was a restlessness in him that I couldn't quite understand. As he grew older, that restlessness turned into entitlement. He began to expect things without earning them, to demand rather than ask. It was subtle at first, a careless comment here, a dismissive tone there, but over time it became impossible to ignore. David and I tried to guide him, to teach him the values we held dear. We reminded him that respect and hard work were the foundation of any good life. But Elijah seemed to believe that the world owed him something, that he deserved more than what we had given him. I remembered the first time I noticed the change clearly. Elijah was in his early 20s, and he had just lost a job due to his own negligence. Instead of taking responsibility, he looked at us with a mixture of frustration and expectation, as if we should bail him out. It was a moment that shook me to my core. I realized then that the son I had raised was slipping away from the values we had tried so hard to instill. Despite this, I held on to hope. I believed that beneath his flaws, Elijah was still my son, the boy who once held my hand and promised to make me proud. I clung to memories of his laughter, his kindness in small moments, and the dreams we had for him. But the tension between us grew. Elijah's demands became more frequent and more aggressive. He wanted money, a car, a place of his own, things we simply couldn't afford. When David fell ill, Elisha's attitude hardened. Instead of stepping up to help, he seemed to withdraw, leaving me to carry the weight of caregiving alone. I often found myself caught between love and frustration. I wanted to protect Elijah, to guide him back to the path of responsibility, but I also felt the sting of his entitlement. It was a thin line between hope and heartbreak. Socially, the contrast between us was stark. David and I lived modestly, proud of what we had built with our own hands. Elijah, however, surrounded himself with friends who valued status and material wealth. He talked about luxury cars and expensive vacations, things that felt worlds away from our reality. It was as if he was trying to live a life that wasn't his, chasing approval from people who didn't know or care about the sacrifices his parents had made. This contrast wasn't lost on me. It deepened the divide between us, making every conversation a potential battlefield. I felt like an outsider in my own home, watching the son I loved drift further away. Yet, despite everything, I never stopped believing in the power of family. I held on to hope that Elijah could change, that the love we shared could bridge the growing gap. I reminded myself that every family has its struggles, its secrets, and its moments of doubt. Looking back now, I see the signs I missed, the subtle manipulations, the quiet resentments, and the moments when Elijah's true intentions peek through. But at the time, I was too wrapped up in grief and hope to see clearly. David's illness had taken a toll on all of us, but it was especially hard on me. I became the caretaker, the emotional anchor, and the financial manager. I juggled doctor's appointments, bills, and household chores, all while trying to keep the peace at home. Elijah's growing demands felt like an added weight, one I wasn't sure I could bear. Still, I tried to be patient. I reminded myself that grief and stress could change people. Maybe Elijah was struggling in ways I didn't understand. Maybe he was scared, just like me. But the truth was harder to face. Elijah's actions were not just the result of stress or confusion. They were calculated, selfish, and hurtful. He began to push boundaries, testing how far he could go before I would say no. And when I did say no, the backlash was swift and painful. I remember one particular argument late at night when Elijah accused me of being selfish for not giving him money to start his life. His words cut deep, not just because of what he said, but because of the anger and entitlement behind them. It was a moment that shattered the fragile peace I had been holding on to. That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering where I had gone wrong. Was I too strict, too lenient? Had I failed as a mother? But deep down, I knew the answer. Elijah's greed wasn't just about me. It was about him. It was about a sense of entitlement that had taken root, fueled by a desire for control and power. And as much as it hurt to admit, I realized that I needed to protect myself, not just from the world, but from the son I loved. This was the family I had. Flawed, complicated, and full of contradictions. A family where love and pain coexisted, where hope and fear battled for dominance. And it was within this tangled web of emotions that the story of that fateful day began. The morning of the funeral dawned cold and gray, the kind of day where the sky seems to weep alongside you. A soft drizzle fell steadily, blurring the edges of the world and turning the pavement slick beneath my feet. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and freshly cut flowers, a bittersweet reminder of life and loss intertwined. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, but it did little to shield me from the chill that wasn't just in the air. It was deep inside my chest, where grief had taken root. As I arrived at the small chapel, the muted murmur of voices greeted me, a low hum of sorrow and sympathy. Faces blurred past, friends, distant relatives, neighbors, all gathered to honor the man I had loved for so many years. Their eyes held pity, their words were gentle, but none could reach the hollow ache that had settled inside me. I felt like a ghost drifting through a world that had moved on without me. The chapel was simple, but filled with warmth. Soft candlelight flickered against the polished wood, casting shadows that danced like memories on the walls. The scent of lilies and roses mingled with the faint aroma of old books and polished floors. I took a seat near the front, my hands folded tightly in my lap, fingers trembling as I tried to hold myself together. The service began with a hymn, voices rising in a fragile chorus that seemed to echo the fragility of my own heart. The priest spoke softly, his words a balm and a burden all at once. He spoke of love, of loss, of the promise of peace beyond this life. But all I could hear was the silence left behind, the empty space where David's laughter used to live. As the eulogy unfolded, memories flooded my mind. Our first meeting, the quiet evenings spent dreaming of a future, the struggles we faced side by side. I remembered his hands, rough from years of labor, always gentle with me. I remembered his smile, the way it could light up a room even on the darkest days. And I remembered the last time I saw him, lying in that hospital bed, fragile and fading, but still holding my hand with a strength I could barely comprehend. Tears slipped down my cheeks, unbidden and unstoppable. The world around me blurred, the faces of those gathered melting into a sea of sorrow. I felt utterly alone, even in the midst of so many. Just as the service was drawing to a close, my phone vibrated quietly in my purse. I hesitated, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and curiosity. Who would call me now, at this moment of unbearable grief? I pulled the phone out, the screen lighting up with a name I hadn't expected to see. David's boss, Mr. Reynolds. My breath caught. Why was he calling? What could be so urgent? With trembling fingers, I answered. Hello? There was a pause. Then his voice came through, low, serious, and urgent. I'm sorry to call you today, especially now, but there's something you need to see, something about Elijah. My heart lurched. Elijah? My son? What could possibly be so important that it couldn't wait? I don't understand, I whispered, my voice cracking. What do you mean? There's been some troubling behavior, Mr. Reynolds said carefully. Things that could affect you, your finances, your safety. I didn't want to say more over the phone. Please, can we meet? I have documents and messages you need to see. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the pew, trying to steady myself. The grief that had consumed me moments ago was now mingled with a sharp, cold fear. What was Elijah involved in? What had I missed? I'll come, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Thank you for telling me. As I ended the call, the chapel felt even colder, the shadows deeper. The mourners were beginning to file out, their whispered condolences trailing behind them like ghosts. I sat there a moment longer, the weight of the day pressing down on me, knowing that this funeral was not just an end, it was the beginning of a new, painful chapter. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds. I stepped out into the damp air, the scent of wet grass and earth filling my lungs. The world was moving forward, but I felt frozen in place, caught between sorrow and suspicion. The call from Mr. Reynolds had planted a seed of doubt, a flicker of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. My son, the boy I had raised with so much love, was suddenly a stranger. And whatever secrets he was hiding, I was determined to uncover them. As I made my way home, the funeral fading behind me, I knew that the days ahead would be filled with questions, confrontations, and heartbreak. But I also knew I had to be strong. For David, for myself. Because sometimes the hardest truths come when you least expect them. On the day you think you're saying goodbye.
After the funeral, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of the city outside. But inside me, a storm was raging, a mix of grief, confusion, and a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The call from Mr. Reynolds echoed in my mind, his words heavy with warning. There's something you need to see, something about Elijah. I knew I couldn't ignore it. The next day, I met Mr. Reynolds at a small cafe near his office. His face was grave, eyes tired but determined. He slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. "I didn't want to involve you in this, but it's serious. Elijah has been making moves behind your back." I hesitated, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, emails, and messages, evidence that made my stomach churn. Elijah had been siphoning money from my accounts, transferring funds without my knowledge. Worse, there were documents suggesting he was trying to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs, pushing to place me in a care home. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. How could my own son, the boy I had raised with love and sacrifice, do this to me? The son who once promised to protect me was now plotting to control me, to strip away my independence and dignity. Tears blurred my vision as I read through the evidence. Each page was a testament to his greed and deception. I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak, the kind of pain that cuts deeper than any wound. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but I also felt a crushing weight of disbelief. Was this really happening? Was my family falling apart before my eyes? Mr. Reynolds watched me quietly. "I'm sorry you have to see this, but you deserve to know the truth." The truth was bitter. Elijah had been living a double life, charming and polite in public, but ruthless and calculating behind closed doors. I thought about the subtle signs I had missed, the late-night phone calls, the sudden expenses, the way he avoided certain questions. I had blamed stress, youth, or even my own imagination. Now it was all painfully clear. As I left the cafe, the weight of the betrayal pressed down on me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply alone. The son I had loved was no longer the boy I knew. He was a stranger, driven by greed and entitlement. Back at home, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the envelope of evidence spread out before me. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the dreams I had for my family, and I wondered how it had all come to this. The social judgment was another burden. Friends and neighbors whispered behind closed doors, their eyes filled with pity or suspicion. Some couldn't understand how a son could betray his mother. Others whispered about money, inheritance, and family secrets. I felt the sting of their judgment, but I also knew that this was my battle to fight. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by Mr. Reynolds, someone who specialized in elder law and family disputes. The meetings were difficult, legal jargon, cold offices, and the harsh reality of what lay ahead. But I was determined. I had to protect myself, my home, and my dignity. Each step forward was a mix of hope and fear. I confronted Elijah, trying to understand why he had turned against me. His anger was explosive, his words sharp and cruel. He accused me of holding him back, of being selfish and controlling. But beneath the anger, I saw something darker: greed, resentment, and a hunger for power. The emotional conflict tore me apart. I loved my son, but I couldn't ignore the damage he was causing. I had to set boundaries, even if it meant breaking my own heart. Friends and family took sides, some offering support, others distancing themselves. The isolation was painful, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for my identity, my freedom, and my right to be treated with respect. As the legal battle unfolded, I learned more about Elijah's manipulations. He had forged documents, lied to professionals, and trying to turn others against me. The betrayal was deep and wide, but so was my determination to stand firm. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the nature of family, the love, the pain, the complexities. I realized that sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most. But I also learned that strength comes from within, from the courage to face the truth and fight for what is right. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer the frightened woman who had answered that phone call at the funeral. I was a mother, fighting to reclaim her life, her dignity, and her peace. And I would not back down. The days following my confrontation with Elijah were a whirlwind of disbelief and dread. I thought I had seen the worst of his betrayal, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth that was about to surface. A truth so shocking, it shattered every fragile hope I had left. It began with a call from Mr. Reynolds, the man who had first warned me. His voice was grave, almost hesitant. "There's something else you need to know. Something unbelievable." I braced myself, heart pounding. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Elijah has been involved in something far worse than we imagined. There's evidence suggesting he faked your husband's death." The words hit me like a thunderclap. Faked David's death? It was impossible. Yet the look in Mr. Reynolds' eyes told me he wasn't joking. I sat down, trembling. "How? Why?" Mr. Reynolds explained that Elijah had orchestrated a complex scheme, manipulating documents, falsifying medical records, even bribing certain officials to make it appear that David had passed away. The goal? To gain full control over the family's assets, including my savings and property. I felt my world tilt, the ground slipping beneath me. The man I had mourned, the husband I had buried, was possibly alive, or at least his death was a lie. And the son I had trusted was the architect of this deception. The betrayal was beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was a calculated, cold-hearted plan to erase my husband and take everything for himself. I thought about the funeral, the tears, the prayers, the final goodbyes. Had it all been a cruel performance? A lie crafted to trap me? Anger surged through me, fierce and raw. How could Elijah do this? How could he betray not only me, but the memory of his own father? But beneath the anger was a deeper, more painful emotion. Grief for the man I had lost and for the family I thought I had. Determined to uncover the full truth, I worked with Mr. Reynolds and my lawyer to gather more evidence. We uncovered forged death certificates, fake hospital reports, and even surveillance footage showing Elijah meeting with suspicious individuals. Each piece of evidence was a dagger, cutting through the illusion I had clung to. The son I loved was not just misguided, he was dangerous. The revelation changed everything. It transformed my grief into a fierce resolve. I was no longer just a widow mourning her husband. I was a woman fighting for justice, for truth, and for her own survival. I confronted Elijah again, this time armed with proof. His facade cracked, and I saw the cold calculation behind his eyes. He didn't deny it. Instead, he sneered, confident that he had the upper hand. But I refused to be broken. I stood tall, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You will not destroy my family. You will not erase my husband's memory, and you will not take what is mine." That moment marked a turning point, not just in our battle, but in my own journey. I realized that strength comes from facing the darkest truths and refusing to be defeated. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles and emotional scars, but I was ready. For David, for myself, for the future I still believed in. Because sometimes the most painful betrayals reveal the deepest strength. The days after the shocking revelation felt like I was trapped in a storm that refused to pass. Inside me, a tempest of emotions raged: hurt, disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. It was as if the ground beneath my feet had crumbled, leaving me suspended in a void where nothing felt certain anymore. I kept replaying everything in my mind: the years of love and sacrifice, the moments of joy and pain, the trust I had placed in my family. How had it all come to this? How had the son I raised with so much hope and care become the architect of such cruelty? The hurt was raw and relentless. It wasn't just about money or possessions, it was about the shattering of trust, the breaking of a sacred bond. Family, I had always believed, was a sanctuary, a place where love and loyalty were unconditional. But now I was forced to confront a painful truth. Love alone is not always enough to protect us from betrayal. I found myself questioning everything. What does it mean to truly love someone? Is love blind? Or does it demand courage? The courage to see the truth, no matter how painful. I realized that love without boundaries can become a trap, allowing others to take advantage of our kindness and generosity. The sense of entitlement Elijah displayed was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just greed, it was a belief that he had a right to what wasn't his, a disregard for the sacrifices made by those who came before him. It made me reflect on the fragile nature of family ties, how easily they can be twisted by selfishness and deceit. I thought about the countless times I had tried to protect him, to guide him, to give him the tools to build a good life. And yet, he chose a path that led to destruction, not just of our family's legacy, but of the very trust that held us together. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, fierce and consuming. But alongside it was a deeper, quieter strength, a resolve to reclaim my life and my dignity. I knew that healing would not come from denial or bitterness, but from acceptance and the setting of clear boundaries. I began to understand that personal boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but lines drawn to protect our well-being and self-respect. They are acts of love, love for ourselves and for those around us. Without them, we risk losing ourselves in the chaos of others' demands and expectations. In the stillness of the night, I often found myself reflecting on the nature of betrayal. It is a wound that cuts both ways, hurting the betrayed and revealing the brokenness of the betrayer. But it also offers a painful clarity, a chance to see people as they are, rather than as we wish them to be. I realized that forgiveness, while powerful, does not mean forgetting or excusing harm. It means freeing ourselves from the chains of resentment and choosing to move forward with wisdom and grace. This journey forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and fears. I had to face the loneliness that comes with standing up against those we love, the fear of being judged or misunderstood, and the pain of watching a family unravel. Yet, amidst the darkness, I found moments of light, the support of friends who stood by me, the quiet strength that grew within me each day, and the hope that, despite everything, I could rebuild a life grounded in truth and self-respect. I learned that personal growth often comes through pain, that the hardest trials can forge the strongest spirits. And I began to see myself not just as a victim of betrayal, but as a survivor, a woman reclaiming her power and her story. This internal struggle was not just about family or money, it was about identity, dignity, and the courage to face life's harshest realities with an open heart. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was no longer afraid. I had found a new kind of strength, the strength to love without losing myself, to trust with wisdom, and to set boundaries that honor both my heart and my soul. And in that strength, I found hope.
The moment I decided to take back control of my life was the moment I stopped being a victim and started becoming a warrior. The weight of betrayal and grief still pressed heavily on my heart. But beneath it all, a fierce determination began to grow, a determination to protect myself, to reclaim my dignity, and to set boundaries that no one, not even my own son, could cross. The first step was legal. With the help of my lawyer, I began the painstaking process of securing my finances. We froze accounts, changed passwords, and put safeguards in place to prevent any further unauthorized access. It was a relief to know that, at least on paper, I was no longer vulnerable to Elijah's manipulations. But the real battle was far more complex. It was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. Confronting Elijah was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. I remember the day vividly. I stood in the living room, the place where so many family memories had been made, and looked him in the eye. The anger and entitlement I had seen before were still there, but now I was different. I was no longer afraid. "I know what you've done," I said quietly but firmly. "The lies, the theft, the betrayal, it ends now." He sneered, trying to intimidate me, but I held my ground. "You don't get to control me or my life anymore. I'm setting boundaries, clear, firm boundaries. If you can't respect that, then you're no longer welcome here." It was a turning point. For the first time, I felt the power of my own voice, the strength that comes from standing up for yourself, even when it's painful. Elijah stormed out, but I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. Setting boundaries wasn't just about keeping Elijah at a distance. It was about reclaiming my sense of self. I started saying no to demands that drained me, no to guilt that wasn't mine to carry, and yes to my own needs and well-being. It was a slow process, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but each step forward was a victory. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, friends who listened without judgment, professionals who guided me through the legal maze, and even strangers who shared their own stories of resilience. Their strength became my strength, reminding me that I was not alone. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, when the memories of betrayal threatened to consume me, but I learned to breathe through the hurt, to find peace in small moments, a walk in the garden, a quiet cup of tea, a phone call with a trusted friend. I also began to rebuild my relationship with myself. I rediscovered passions and dreams that had been buried under years of sacrifice and pain. I took time to nurture my body and mind, realizing that self-care was not selfish, but essential. Through it all, I held on to the lessons I had learned, the importance of boundaries, the power of self-respect, and the courage to face life's challenges head-on. I understood that empowerment is not about controlling others, but about taking responsibility for your own life and choices. The journey was far from over. There were still legal battles to fight, emotional wounds to heal, and difficult conversations ahead. But I faced them with a new sense of confidence and clarity. I was no longer the woman who answered that phone call on the day of my husband's funeral. I was a survivor, a fighter, and a woman who had reclaimed her voice. And with every step I took, I moved closer to the peace and freedom I deserved. Healing didn't come overnight. It was a slow, uneven journey. Sometimes a gentle sunrise, other times a stormy night. But with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, more whole, and more at peace. The wounds left by betrayal and loss were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they became part of the story of my resilience. I learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing what Elijah had done. It was about freeing myself from the heavy burden of anger and resentment. Forgiving him, in my own time and on my own terms, allowed me to reclaim my heart and open it to hope again. Self-love became my anchor. I began to treat myself with the kindness and respect I had always given to others. I celebrated small victories.
moments when I chose peace over pain, strength over fear. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, who reminded me that I was worthy of love and happiness. Rebuilding my life meant rediscovering joy in the everyday, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the laughter of friends, the quiet comfort of a good book. It meant setting new goals, nurturing old passions, and embracing the future with cautious optimism. I found empowerment not just in standing up to betrayal, but in choosing to live fully despite it. I realized that my worth was not tied to anyone else's actions or approval. I was enough, strong, capable, and deserving of peace. Though the scars remained, they were reminders of my journey, not chains to hold me back. I had faced the darkest parts of my family's story and emerged with a deeper understanding of love, boundaries, and the power of self-respect. As I looked ahead, I felt a quiet hope, a belief that life could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. I knew there would be challenges, but I was ready to meet them with courage and grace. This was my new beginning, a life rebuilt on truth, healing, and the unshakable strength of a woman who refused to be broken.
As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize how complicated family can be. Love and pain often live side by side, and sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But through all the heartbreak and betrayal, I've learned something important. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about protecting your heart and your peace. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, no matter who you are or where you come from. It's okay to say no. It's okay to stand up for yourself. And it's okay to walk away from relationships that drain you or cause harm. Family isn't always perfect, and sometimes it's messy. But that doesn't mean you have to lose yourself in the process. Your feelings matter. Your well-being matters. And your voice matters. I hope my story encourages you to look closely at your own relationships, whether with parents, children, siblings, or partners, and ask yourself, are my boundaries being respected? Am I honoring my own needs? If the answer is no, remember that change is possible. It starts with small steps, with courage, and with the belief that you are worthy of love and peace. If you've ever faced similar struggles, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us carry these hidden battles, and sharing our stories can be a powerful way to heal and grow. Please feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Your story might just be the light someone else needs. If this video resonated with you, please like and share it with others who might find comfort or strength in it. And if you want to join a community where we support each other through life's toughest moments, don't forget to subscribe. Together, we can create a space of understanding, empowerment, and hope. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, no matter what you're facing, you have the strength to overcome it and the right to live a life filled with love, respect, and peace.